Hey y'all, I want to talk to you a little bit about Emma Willard, an imperfect pioneer for women's education. I selected Emma for two reasons. One, most of my study of women in history has been focused on the 20th century, and Emma actually lived most of her life in the 19th. And two, her childhood and actually lifelong hero is the Marquis de Lafayette. I have been listening to a lot of the Hamilton soundtrack recently and felt like that meant there were some good vibes between us. So let me tell you about Emma. She was born in 1787 and showed scholastic aptitude early on. Her father sent her and her brother to the first state-supported school in Connecticut, where she excelled, and she soon became a very popular and successful teacher until she married her first husband, John Willard. Although she gave up her formal education and teaching when she married him, she continued an informal education through her nephew, who attended the nearby Middlebury College. She continued conversations with him, read his notes and textbooks, and began her own self-taught advanced studies. When her family met with some financial challenges, she returned to teaching and began opening up her own boarding school for girls. This is when she became a formal and public advocate for women's education. She wanted the state to fund a seminary for women. And I want to read to you some of her words that she sent to the legislature advocating a plan for the education of women. The object of this address is to convince the public that a reform with respect to female education is necessary, that it cannot be effected by individual exertion, but that it requires the aid of the legislature, and further, by shewing the justice, the policy, and magnanimity of such an undertaking, to persuade the body to endow a seminary for females as the commencement of such reformation. As evidence that this statement does not exaggerate the female influence in our society, our sex need but be considered in the single relation of mothers. In this character, we have the charge of a whole mass of individuals who are to compose the succeeding generation. During that period of youth when the pliant mind take any direction, to which it is steadily guided by a forming hand. How important a power is given by this charge, yet little do too many of my sex know how, either to appreciate or improve it. Unprovided with the means of acquiring that knowledge which flows liberally to the other sex, having our time of education devoted to frivolous acquirements, how should we understand the nature of the mind, so as to be aware of the importance of those early impressions which we make upon the minds of our children? In calling upon my patriotic countrymen to effect so noble an object, the consideration of national glory should not be overlooked. Ages have rolled away, barbarians have trodden the weaker sex beneath their feet, tyrants have robbed us of the present light of heaven, and fain would take its future. Nations, calling themselves polite, have made us the fancied idols of ridiculous worship, and we have repaid them with ruin for their folly. But where is the wise and heroic country who has considered that our rights are sacred, though we cannot defend them? History shows not that country. It shows many whose legislatures have sought to improve their various vegetable productions and their breeds of useful brutes, but none whose public councils have made it an object of their deliberations to improve the character of their women. Yet though history lifts not her finger to such a one, anticipation does. She points to a nation which, having thrown off the shackles of authority and precedent, shrinks not from schemes of improvement, because other nations have never attempted them, but which, in its pride of independence, would rather lead than follow in the march of human improvement. A nation, wise and magnanimous to plan, enterprising to undertake, and rich in resources to execute. Does not every American exult that this country is his own? And who knows how great and good a race of men may yet arise from the forming hands of mothers, enlightened by the bounty of that beloved country to defend her liberties, to plan her future improvement, and to raise her to unparalleled glory. That is a lot of 19th century talk, so I want to pull out a few important themes. The first is that women's education should be a collective endeavor rather than left to individual choice. Emma constantly advocated that states should invest in women's education. Second, Emma says that women's education should be focused on their role as mothers and therefore their ability to teach the succeeding generations. This is the idea of Republican motherhood. And finally, that history shows no country which has invested in women's education, although we know from past lectures that's untrue. But she says history has shown no country that has invested in women's education, and America's unique character makes it ready for this new challenge, and in fact, its own national glory will come from trying this unique endeavor. Her words are bold, but in the end, unsuccessful. No state legislature ever funds Emma's school. However, the city of Troy, New York takes up the cause, and Troy Seminary begins. Emma leads and teaches the school for many years, and has quite a few accomplishments while she's there. She writes and publishes textbooks in history and geography. She develops a new type of curriculum for teaching, which many of her graduates go on to teach across the nation. She gains the deed for the school in a time when women weren't supposed to be able to own property, and she hosts her childhood hero, the Marquis de Lafayette, who later hosts her while she's on a tour of women's schools in Europe. She finds them incredibly lacking. Emma is interesting because she is a complex and imperfect figure. You can hear from her words that she represents lots of parts of women's educational history. She advocates for them to learn and learn new things, like anatomy, but she also pushes that their education should be focused on its complementary role to men. She eschews the idea of women being involved in politics, but she is repeatedly political. She refuses suffragettes, and later in her life, she even makes concessions to slave states in a hope to avert the Civil War. Emma is political even if she doesn't come down on the side of history that we would want her to. And that's one of the reasons I find her particularly interesting. Because as a historian, she reminds us that we can use anyone to represent our historical views, because people are complex. I could hold up a quote of Emma Willard's and show her as the pioneer of women's education, really pushing for new ideas. And I can also hold up a quote of Emma Willard's to show you the ways that she represents conservatism and a resistance to change. She was a real person. She struggled with stepchildren that didn't like her. She got seasick on the way to Europe, and she had complex thoughts that changed over time. I really liked getting to know this one particular woman and character because I am a particular woman and character in history, and if I ever make it into a historical record, you'll be able to do the same for me. Hold up things that look great and things where I would cringe. And that's what Emma Willard brings to us. Movement forward while still working through the muddy waters of your own sense of place. So I would encourage you to read a little bit about Emma Willard in between listening to songs from Hamilton. Thanks.